Welcome to Kelly Minds Her Manners, a podcast about real estate and entrepreneurship with a twist. Here's your host, Kelly Robinson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kelly Minds Her Manners. Today, I am super excited because I have Amir Korangy with me. He is the founder and publisher of The Real Deal magazine, which is the biggest real estate publication in the country. And he is also a friend, and he is so fun and funny and smart and interesting. He has such an interesting story. He actually came to the United States when he was a little kid as a refugee from Iran, and he's going to talk about that. He's also just the calmest person for somebody that I think has a ton of energy. He has such a calmness about him as well. And his voice is also really soothing. I kind of want him to read me a bedtime story. Is that weird? Anyway, I'm really excited for you to hear Amir's story and everything that he's doing and all the hats that he wears. So please welcome Amir Korangy. Amir, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule. Really grateful for you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I want to get started, and I like to start from the beginning, from childhood. Mm-hmm. I know you had a very interesting childhood, and I want to know more about that. So you were born in Tehran, mm-hmm. and your family left after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, right?
Yeah, we left about a year after it started.
Okay. And you went to Paris and Spain. And,
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had this trip. The revolution happened, and I was a kid. So I remember everything, and I remember going through this whole experience. But the older I get, I often think about my parents, because my mom was in her 20s. And imagine having soldiers come into your house and tell you that they're looking for your husband and that they're staying there until your husband comes home. And I always think about that. The older I get, those are the memories that sneak back up, because for me, I was a kid and I knew my parents were going to make everything okay. Nowadays, I think more about what went through their head. And it was a strange time because the revolution happened, the government changes, and all of a sudden you had the largest modern exodus in the history of Iran. You had 6 million people that left the country. And we were a part of it. We were part of that. Then we had to leave because my father was wanted. And then one morning my father goes to work and I don't see him for 2 years after that.
Oh my God.
And then we reconnect a year later or in Portugal and then later in the US.
Wow. That's terrifying. And also, I can understand why you would look back and you think about your parents being these strong figures when you're a kid who are going to make everything okay. But then you look back now and you're like, God, they were so young and they must have been terrified and just keeping it all together.
Yeah.
They must have been so strong.
Yeah, I often think about that. And I asked my dad about it because for him, it must have been so strange because he had to go into hiding. Yeah. I mean, imagine he had a very comfortable life and he had his 2 young sons and he has a home, he has a business. And then just overnight, he's in hiding. He never goes back to that house again after he left the house that I was born in and grew up in. Yeah, it's a very strange thing. But when I asked them about it, they always say, "Oh yeah, we just had to do it. We did what we had to do." And it's funny that they just deal with it. And as a kid, I just experienced. I remember all of it. I remember going through Afghanistan to Pakistan to Europe and making my way to the U.S. I was an illegal immigrant. We snuck into the U.S. with me, my mom, and my brother. And nobody spoke the language. I was like 8. So I grew up in Iran. So we didn't speak English, but we knew it, we would figure something out. And then that was that. We landed here. We came here illegally. And now that's become such a hot topic because you constantly hear about people coming in. But it was easier back then. And the security at the airports, because we landed at JFK without papers, right? So we got on a plane in Portugal, landed in JFK, and nobody knew which flight you came from or what happened. It was just complete chaos. And we were instructed my mom was instructed not to have her ID, make sure that we don't have any sort of identification with us.
Wow.
So we landed here and we claimed independency. And we didn't even have a right to an attorney because they were like, you actually don't have any rights because you're not Americans and you're not admitted in here. And I remember there was a translator who was helping us translate all this stuff. And he was the Iranian guy who worked for the immigration services. And he was like, guys, don't worry about anything. Just like, be quiet. Don't say anything. Everything's going to be okay. And then there was this other guy who was sort of screaming at my mom. And the translator was like, don't worry about him. Everything's going to be okay. Just don't say anything and you're going to be fine. And I always remembered that guy. And we thought it was pretty funny talking about it.
That's such a wild ride. So many people just have such a typical upbringing in that it doesn't dawn on them what you may have had to go through at such a young age and how that may have shaped you into who you are today. So what about that experience maybe impacted you the most in your adult life?
Well, the fact that we were so transient when we were young, because we were moving around for about a year before we landed in New York. And I only stayed in New York overnight, and the next morning we went down to the DC area. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we started moving around a lot, just not only in the DC area, but still moving from apartment to home and different things. And as a kid, you just live that and you do whatever your parents tell you to do. And as long as they love you, everything's okay. You go to school, you go to a different school, you meet new friends. Mm-hmm. But it was very normal for us until pretty much I was like 14, 15 years old. There was a lot of movement in the house. And it took my parents a long time to adjust because they didn't speak any English and they just had to do. Imagine going to New Guinea all of a sudden and you're supposed to earn for your family. Overnight, you don't speak the language. Nobody cares that you're an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. They're like, what can you do? Seeing that, I think, experiencing that, looking back on it. At the time you're living it, you don't really notice, but looking back on it, just seeing how my parents just dealt with things. And they were like, okay, now we have to do this. Now we have to earn money. So that means I have to go deliver pizzas. Mm-hmm. So this is what I'm going to do to make things happen. Yeah. And I'm sure they had their issues, but as far as we could see, that's how they dealt with it. Mm-hmm. They just took it in stride.
That's amazing. It's amazing how strong people who are especially have children, which I don't have and you don't have, but how they just do whatever and they have to do and stay so strong for their families.
Yeah. You hear these stories about women who rip the door off the hinges to save their kids from burning cars. So there is something to it. As a parent, you have this paternal instinct to do whatever it takes to help your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
You and I don't have that.
Yeah, right.
Towards our pets, we do, I guess.
Yeah, I would do anything for my pets and my friends and my family, but I guess it's a whole other motherly, fatherly instinct that comes into play. So why DC? What was it about the DC area?
And my uncle was there already, and he came to the States for school, and he was a doctor in DC. He was a radiologist. So we came to DC because he was there. And he was great. Him and his family, obviously, they housed us when we first landed and helped us get on our feet and stuff. And so it was nice to have that source there. Yeah.
So what about your childhood in DC really kind of stands out for you?
Well, I remember in the 80s and the 90s, one thing I noticed was we always lived in sort of lower income housing when growing up, especially in DC. Mm-hmm. And I went to generally a lot of black schools. Mm-hmm. So, and I just remembered that was my first interaction with kids and American families and things like that in America. And I just remembered that families were so welcoming to me, especially. And you would look at me and you would say, I'm white. But the way that they were accepting of me was really beautiful. Mm. And that was my first interaction with American families. That was the culture I grew up with. Mm. I grew up with black culture growing up. And then years later, I went to high school in California to play basketball. So I went to California and all of my friends there were all white. And that was really my first interaction with the all white families.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it really was two different Americas. But it was nice to see that there was a mutual connectivity between both races and both coasts.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is America. You get the full picture.
So, and did you start playing basketball? And what led you to go to California for basketball? Was it a special high school for really good basketball
I was
players?
good in basketball when I was a kid, and I was tall, so the coaches would be like, come and rebound. But it was nice to be on teams, and it was a good hobby, and I really enjoyed it. And then I started going to basketball camps, and you start getting recruited by colleges. And I remember I got a brochure from Pepperdine University. And I was like, that sounds such a stupid name for a college. I was like looking at colleges in Northeast or somewhere closer and more known to me. And then I saw their brochure and I opened it up and it was like this beautiful campus on the cliffs in Malibu. And I was like, oh my God, I have to go to the school. And so I went there to talk to the coaches and stuff. And it's a private school, but it gets subsidized by the government. And the scholarships are used for this in-state school kids. So for my senior year in high school, I went to high school in California.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's how I ended up there. And then, of course, my grades were too low, so I couldn't get a scholarship. And I had to come back to the East Coast.
But you still went to BU, which is not a bad school.
After 2 years of junior college, I went to BU.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went to BU and you earned your BA in journalism and media, right?
I didn't finish there. I finished at Emerson College. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you went to graduate school at Emerson or if you finished at BU.
Yeah. No, I went and finished at Emerson.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually got accepted to Emerson.
It was a great school, a liberal arts school in Boston. And my brother at the time was at Harvard. So we were both in Boston together.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was a great time. Yeah, I loved it. But now they sold the school because the school used to be in the Back Bay of Boston, which is beautiful, in Beacon Hill. And they sold all those beautiful school buildings from the school and turned them into condos, unfortunately. And now the school is in some high rise.
I remember visiting it when I was looking at schools and it was beautiful. So it was, that's sad. That's always so sad.
I know.
So what point in your life did you realize you wanted to go into journalism?
I was a great creative writer when I was in high school, and my teachers, Mrs. Brown, Mrs. Schneiderman, they always encouraged my writing. And when they put me first in front of a computer, because this was like in the 1990s, early 90s, I was blown away how easy you could type on the computer. And they would always give me access to the computer room. They were like, whenever you want to go work on your stories, you could go and work on your stories. So when I was really into the writing and the English and all of that. And so when I wanted to go to college, I really didn't want to do creative writing because you couldn't build a career on that. So I went to journalism, which was the second best thing. And I went from writing fiction to writing news. So that's what happened. Yeah, but now I can't do fiction for the life of me. Can you?
Really?
No.
Not even as a hobby?
Not even to a single page.
I bet you could.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe we have to do a workshop and see.
That would be fun.
So after college, you moved to Baja, Mexico, and you started a newspaper there.
Yeah.
What was it about Mexico that enticed you?
Well, I really wanted to write for a Boston paper. You grew up there, you're a kid, and you go to school there. And I was like, I want to write for the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald. And I couldn't get any sort of a job there. And at either one of the places, I was like, well, I don't want to go do these. A lot of my friends who couldn't get jobs in media, they would go and become insurance salesmen or go into finance or something like that. And I didn't want to do any of that stuff. So I was like, I'm going to start my own paper then that way I could be a journalist. I went to California because I thought Southern California could use a magazine that would be like Hampton's magazine or Gotham magazine, like a social sort of a magazine. Yeah. And they didn't really have that. So I wanted to start this thing called Coastal Living. And I had a pitch put together with my friend from college, John Warner, who was my partner then. we went there. We had a pitch. We were like, let's go pitch it to banks. Where do you go to a bank? Oh, look, there's a Citibank. Let's walk into it and tell them we have an idea for it. That's how we thought.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. So you just go until people say, well, this is not how it works. This is not the place for it. We have a division. It's in New York, whatever. So we learned the hard way that nobody wanted to give us money. And we were like really there we were so sure that this is going to happen. I was 23 years old and I was like, this is 100% going to work. So we're in California and we were like, well, let's break this down. Why don't we just try to figure out the printing? We do the design. We do all the stories. We were really willing to put in the work, but we couldn't pay for the printing. The printing was very expensive. So we were like, let's go to Mexico and find cheap printing because everything is cheaper in Mexico. And so we go down to Mexico and we realize that actually printing is like 3 times more expensive because they didn't have the technology for it. They were still working with old machines. And because there wasn't that many printing plants, they could raise their prices. So we came back, but we realized that there was a huge American market in northern Mexico because there was this whole expat community that lived there. We were like, let's forget this coastal living stuff. Let's go start it for these guys because then we could do a news magazine instead of doing this social magazine, we could do this weekly news sort of roundup for the expats that live there. And we started this magazine, the Gringo Gazette, that's south of the border. And it was a weekly magazine and we had this great idea and we met with this woman who was a printer. We met her at a bar randomly. She was like, I inherited somebody told us. We were at a bar and we were telling this guy that we were looking for a printer. He was like, oh yeah, well, Carrie who comes in here, I think she has a printing plant. And we're like, a woman who owns the printing plant. And it turns out that he did. And this woman, she would come there. She was a tough person and she was a drunk, but she owned the printing plant. And we told her our idea. She was like, oh, how interesting. I have 2 houses in Mexico. And if I can write the food reviews, then I'll give you 2 editions of the printing for free. Oh. Not for free, but on credit. So she was like, you could go out there and try to do it, but I'll give you 2 editions on credit.
Wow.
And we were like, whatever you need, Carrie. And
talk about being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, but she was like, your name's Amir. She was like, you can't go out there and try to do business with that name. Nobody's going to want to do a business with an Islamist or a Muslim.
God.
Yeah, she was brutal. She was insistent on changing my name, and of course, we would never do that. But anyways, she did give us those 2 credits for those to publish, and we printed it. We put it together. And we lived in Mexico. And so we were living in Mexico, putting out this weekly magazine. We immediately started making money from it because everybody was trying to target these expats who were in Mexico. And we were getting, I don't know if you remember the telephone company, MCI.
Of course.
AT&T.
Yeah.
Like those guys were all taking full page ads in this weekly dinky newspaper. So it was good. And we really liked it. And then we were like, you know what? Why don't we do this in the States? We can do the same thing in the States because Mexico started getting very difficult to live in. And I love Mexico, but it's a very pay to play sort of a place. And that's hard to have long-term plans for.
Yeah. And then, so you sold that.
We sold it to the printer, to Carrie.
To Carrie.
Yeah.
She bought it.
Yeah, she had the Gringo Gazette, and now she had the South of the Border. And she kept them both going for years. I mean, I think as recently as 6 years ago or 5 years ago. Yeah,
that's amazing. So then you went back to DC.
I went back to DC to start the Washington Free Press. Yeah. So I was like, same concept, weekly newspaper, but we make it super salacious, right? Like the Washington Post was very conservative, not conservative in view, but conservative in that coverage.
Right.
And the Washington Times was sort of the second paper, but that was even more conservative. They didn't really have anything fun.
Spicy.
Yeah. So we started the Washington Free Press, and it was focused on the Northwest section of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And then that's it. We did this like weekly news thing. We covered a lot of the crime. So and there was, at the time, Washington, D.C. was like the murder capital of the country. And so there was a lot of crime to cover. So we covered a lot of that, and we covered some local news. And that was the extent of that. And then there was another sort of a weekly paper there that was much more established than we were, the city paper. And they came and snatched us up. And then that was it. Then I thought I would go back to school for publishing. And I went back to Boston. I started taking some classes. I realized I knew more than the school did at that point because they were
done
like,
it.
yeah, but they were also not using PageMaker yet or none of this Illustrator or any of that stuff. So they had nothing to teach me. So I went to New York to go to a big publishing house to learn publishing. And I went to Random House. I got a job at Random House as an associate as an assistant to an editor, which was totally below me. I know I was like 24 years old, but I already had 2 newspapers.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to learn the publishing business, and Random House is the biggest, but it wasn't the kind of publishing I wanted to do.
That was lucky for the editor to have somebody who had as much experience as you to be their assistant.
Yeah, I got hired pretty fast.
Yeah.
And they wanted to pay me $36,000 a year. And before I even showed up for my first day at work, my friend contacts me and says, Amir, I have another person you have to meet with. They're starting an internet company and you should work with them and just meet with them. I was like, I have a job. It starts in 2 weeks. And he was like, no, just meet with this guy. He's going to pay you twice the money that you're getting paid. I was like, all right, let me go meet with him. Mm-hmm. And the guy is like, how to work in email. I was like, yes. I have an AOL account. He was like, great. He was like, you're perfect. This is going to work out. I saw your CV. I need you to come and help me launch the New York office for eGroups, this company, egroups.com. And it was the email list, basically. Mm-hmm. And so he paid me a lot more money. I never showed up for my job at Random House. I went immediately into the internet bubble of the 1998. So that's where and I started working. I started working for digital companies until the entire sort of ecosystem, the tech ecosystem collapsed in 2001, right before 2001, and it was terrible. And Yahoo came and bought our company.
Right. Okay, so that's how you got into Yahoo.
That's how I got into Yahoo, because they came and bought eGroups for $500 million.
Wow.
I lasted at Yahoo for maybe 3 months because I had all these grand ideas about how Yahoo should have a Yahoo News, sort of internal for the company. And I put one together and my managers were like, you've used your time building this when you should have been doing all this other work.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, this is not going to work out. I was like, if you guys can't appreciate what this masterpiece I put together, this is not going to work out. And so that was that. They let me go. And then I had a nice severance from them. And I was like, I'm going to travel. So I went to Morocco and Spain and really took my time. I went to my friend's wedding. And then by the time I came back, I got back on September 9th, 2001.
Oh, wow.
In my apartment in Brooklyn. And then when I get back, it was a really long flight. And I passed out. The next day, I don't pick up the phone or anything. And then the following morning on September 11th, my brother calls me. He's like, Amir, are you okay? I was like, well, yeah, what's going on? He was like, turn on the TV and call me back in 5 minutes. And I turned on the TV and I was in Brooklyn in Prospect Heights. And I saw the TV showing the smoke come out of one of the World Trade Centers. I couldn't believe it. I go upstairs on my roof to see it because we could see the World Trade Center. And I'm like, wow, there's smoke coming out of, and everybody was on the roof and looking at it. And it was such a sour and terrible time. Like there was a gloom. And then the buildings came down. Nobody had any answers. But that night in Brooklyn, the smoke from the World Trade Center, it was coming through, and all the thick smoke was coming through there. And it was such a weird time in New York because everybody just wanted to help. Everybody wanted to help. Everybody was united. And it took something like that to bring, all of a sudden, everybody was the same. And people would volunteer to go down there. They would actually tell people, we don't need any more volunteers. They would come on the news and say, we don't need any more volunteers. And it was, that was nice to see that people just, all different kinds of people in bad moods, going through divorces, whatever they were going through. They were like, I want to volunteer. I want to help. How can I help? So it was nice to see that.
Yeah, that was. I remember I was in New Jersey at Mason Gross School of the Arts during that, and the smoke was all the way. As we know from today, smoke travels really far.
Yeah. Wow.
with the wildfires and the fires.
This is the first time I'm experiencing smoke coming from Canada.
Yeah, me too. So after Yahoo, you traveled, and then you came back right around the time that September 11th happened. What you started investing in real estate in New York. When did that happen and why? How?
Well, what happened was I came back, September 11th happened. There was no jobs. It was one of the worst markets in the world. And I was let go at Yahoo. I was a bad employee. So it was not like I could be like, hey, I was at this company for the last 2 years. And then so I tried to use my contacts that I knew at Yahoo and all these places. And for the life of me, I could not get a job. And it was one of the worst job markets. Nobody knew what was going to happen. People were talking about how New York is going to be empty because now planes are going to come land here. So it was a very bad job market. Yeah. And there was this, all of a sudden, there was this attention to the Middle East. All of a sudden, everybody knew where Iran was. And all of a sudden, and I'm a Muslim. I was brought up Muslim. Yeah. Actually, my parents aren't religious at all, but in Iran, when you're born, they automatically give you a religion. Right. So, but in that sense, it was, and my name is Amir, and all these thoughts were going through my head that maybe I'm being discriminated against. But it wasn't anything noticeable, honestly. I think when people could help, especially in New York, they would try to help, and it wasn't something that would come up. But it was a really bad job market. And I did buy real estate very young. So when I first moved to New York, I was living in the Village, and it was, the rents even back then were ridiculous. I was like, oh my God. And so I lived in the city for a year. And then for the second year, I went and I was like, let me buy something in Brooklyn. And I was very adventurous and I didn't care. I was like, as long as with the train, I could be in Union Square within 30 minutes, I'll go anywhere, Yeah. And so I did that. I went to Prospect Heights. This was Brooklyn before people would go to Brooklyn. The broker was like, she was like, I don't cross Flatbush Avenue. She was in Park Slope. Oh, okay. I was like, I'll go walk it. She gave me the keys. I went to the apartment. It was a 2-bedroom in Prospect Heights for $110 million. Or I was like, I'll give you $105,000. I had $24,000 in savings. So I was like, I'll give you $105,000. And they were like, yeah, sure. And so I got that 2-bedroom and I was like, this is better because at least now I'm near the train. I could go to the city when I need to. I'm not throwing away money in rent. That really bothered me. And so I was happy there. I was happy to have my own apartment and stuff. And then when I came back after September 11th, I still had my apartment. I was living there. And I had to get a job. So I went and waited tables. And one thing about waiting tables is that it allows you to go anywhere in the world and survive. If you can wait tables, you can go anywhere and survive. And I waited tables all through college and high school. And so I was like, let me go wait tables. And I went, and in New York City, they require that you have experience in New York restaurants to get a job. Yeah. But this guy ended up hiring me. I met the chef. He was a nice guy. He saw me walking around with my resume, going to restaurants. And he was like, come on in. And he totally understood who I was and coming from. He was like, okay, you're hired. Start tonight. I was like, great. Aww. And then so I did that job for about 6 months, trying to still find other jobs. And I was like, screw this. I can't do this. I don't want to wait tables and live a minimal life in New York. Yeah. And then I couldn't get a job. I was like, I'm going to sell my apartment and get out. And I went to put it on the market, and my apartment was worth $360,000. So all of a sudden I had this nice capital. I didn't expect it to grow that much. I knew it had gone up, but not that much. And I was like, this is better. I was like, screw a job. I was like, I knew all the market in Prospect Heights really well. So I would buy from the local brokers. This was before Element and all these firms were back in Brooklyn. They didn't go to Brooklyn. Right. I would buy from the local brokers in Brooklyn, and then I would sell it through Element or Corcoran and those guys. And it was during the era of where the exodus to Brooklyn was happening, the start of it. So I was just doing that nonstop. And I was buying and flipping really fast, not even holding on to them for 10 months or 5 months or anything, like really fast.
That time too, in that the middle of that decade, right? That was when things were growing into their prices in really a couple months.
Yeah. And I was doing it and I really liked it. The money was really good. I started doing townhouses. I started doing small multifamilies. But I couldn't find anything to read. I wanted to get more information. And I was like, wow, this would be great. This is a great idea for this market. It's a good market. Yeah. The people I would meet were super intelligent. Everybody was a hard worker. As a kid growing up in Maryland and places like that, when people say you're a real estate broker, it's their mom doing it for 3 hours after school. But these guys were in New York. They were there to work. And I really appreciated that. That's when I got the idea for the Real Deal. I was like, this is a great idea for this market. They need it.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question. What about real estate investing led you to start The Real Deal?
Well, it's funny. One of the movies that really inspired me was Igby Goes Down. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but there's the Jeff Goldblum character who owns the lofts in Soho. And I really loved that guy. I thought he was a very interesting guy. He was like, everybody should have contracts, and I was like, that's cool. Let me look into this whole flipping of apartments. So that was interesting. But my friend at the time, a friend of mine was like, let's go. You don't have a job. I'm not doing anything. Let's go become real estate brokers. Everyone's becoming real estate brokers.
Right.
I was like, you know what? This would be a great way to understand the business and then do my idea for the magazine for The Real Deal. So I went and became a real estate broker for a very short amount of time. And I had sort of learned the business, went through the training program. I did a couple of deals in Prospect Heights.
Where did you work?
I worked on the 7th Avenue, Corcoran.
Okay.
Yeah. Same office that wouldn't take me across the Flatbush.
So funny.
But yeah, so I started doing stuff there, and then I had enough knowledge to understand what kind of content brokers were sort of hoping for. And I put together a presentation for The Real Deal. I came up with the concept. I knew how to work PageMaker. I came up with this one pager, and I went to pitch it to trade publishers like Cranes and Bloomberg and other places that I thought would be interested in this kind of thing. And it was funny. They all turned it away, and they said that there's not enough content to cover real estate. I was like, well, nobody covers it. That's why.
Right.
So they really didn't believe in the idea that there could be enough coverage for real estate, and which was such a funny thing because you're talking about the most influential people in a city are the real estate investors, are the major landlords.
Yeah.
They're giving the most amount to government officials. They're giving the most amount in taxes. But nobody covered them. You heard about Donald Trump, and that was pretty much the extent of what you knew about New York City real estate. Even the people who were in the business only knew the top 10, top 20 people. And there was a lot to cover there. And luckily, they all turned me away. I did this one flip on St. John's Place in Prospect Heights. And it wasn't supposed to happen because the board knew that I was a flipper and the deal wasn't supposed to happen. It did happen. And I had $80,000 from that deal. I was like, let me take the $80,000 and just do try to do as many issues as I can, maybe 3 or 4 issues.
Yeah.
And I would do all the work myself. I would lay it out myself. I would write all the stories using different names.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So there was like a Charles Brinkley, all sorts of strange names. And after the first issue came out, I thought it was like such a hit. I thought it was like such an amazing hit. And I was like, I have to have amazing distribution for this because somebody's going to steal my idea. And so I hired Mitchell's News, who does the distribution, the biggest door-to-door distribution in the city. And I spent a lot of money to make sure that first issue is widely spread so everybody who needs to know knows about it. And I put it out there, and I was so excited. I never put a contact me or an address or anything except the phone number. And people were calling the phone number. They were saying, I want to subscribe and this and that. And I was like, holy shit, I can't believe
that's amazing.
People are seeing it and they're responding to it. It was great. And then for the second issue, I knew I couldn't do it by myself. So there was Stuart Elliott. I met him through the dean at Columbia University Journalism School. Because when I was looking for reporters, I was like, let me go hire students. Right. They'll work for 10 cents a word.
Yeah.
So I went to Columbia Journalism. I was handing out flyers at the school, and this professor sees me. He's like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm trying to find writers. He was like, here, come to my office. And then he put me in touch with all these great alums who were with him. And that's how I met Stuart, because Stuart was at the New York Times, and he put me in touch with Stuart, and Stuart wrote for the first issue that I put out. And then for the second issue, I was like, there's no way I could do a second issue by myself. It was way too much work. I was working 7 days, 24/7. And so I tell Stuart, I was like, you could be a reporter at the New York Times, or you could be the editor of this new magazine that I'm doing out of my house in Brooklyn. He lived in the Upper West Side at the time. And he's like, I want to be the editor of The Real Deal. And he came on board, and it was great. I'm so grateful for that connection.
I love that. I love that story. That's awesome. And now you are an adjunct professor at Columbia, right?
Yes.
And also you also teach classes at NYU, right?
I started at NYU. Sam Shandong got me involved, and he was like, you have to come and teach a class. And I was like, I don't know how to do a class. And he was like, I'll teach you everything you need to know. And he helped me put together a curriculum. And we came up with a class called Real Estate Media and Information. And the idea is like the different stages of media for a real estate project. And different ideas of how they can pitch their ideas to put together decks and things like that for marketing and performers and things like that. And I really liked the class. I did it for 3 years at NYU. Mm-hmm. One of the professors at NYU, she became the dean of GSAP at Columbia. And then she was like, you have to come and do the class at Columbia. Mm-hmm. They were very friendly. And so I was like, I hate to leave NYU, because they are the ones who brought me in. And so I decided to do it for both.
Yeah.
And that was hell.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Everything that you do as it is.
So I only lecture at NYU now, and I have the classes at Columbia.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
I love that. Is there a particular aspect of real estate that you're most passionate about, seeing as you cover all of it?
We used to think that the bigger the deals are, so there more money meant more interest, and that there's some truth to that. But I really feel like the stories, those are the things that I'm drawn to, because now seeing a transaction, no matter how crazy, I feel like money is so cheap now that, oh, great, they did a $50 million house or $1 billion building. There's dime a dozen now.
Yeah.
So I don't really find that stuff interesting. I feel like our audience is also being sort of numb to that too. Mm-hmm. I like the parts that I like are, I think that the parts that we get to tell stories and be narrative about a certain deal or how something came together, or giving context, being able to use the news and using our knowledge to educate people who are reading our content. So everything is informative and everybody walks away learning something new, despite whatever the topic could be.
Right.
And that's sort of a cultural thing. You can't tell reporters what to write, right? They write what they write. But you try to build that in the culture of the company and encourage that kind of writing. But those are the stuff that excites me, being able to see stories.
Yeah. And how has your reader audience changed, or has it changed over the years?
Yeah, when I first launched, I was very focused on residential brokerage, simply because that's the business I knew, and I knew the flipping of the properties and the brokerage business. But I was very certain that the real deal should be something that captures the whole universe of real estate, because I really believe that residential impacts retail impacts commercial, office, they're all hand in hand. So, and then when you saw the investors and when you saw the finance people for this stuff, they did all the asset classes. It wasn't just like, hey, I only want to have an apartment, or I'm only in commercial.
Yeah.
They're all in, for the most part, they invest across the board. So I wanted to be able to cover that for that. I thought that if I covered the whole universe of it, I capture all the money that's involved, then the audience could be a lot bigger, because real estate is the largest asset class in the world. So it's not just the brokers or the investors or the developers or the landlords or the institutional people or the finance people or the banks or the attorneys and accountants and all of these people who are involved, not to mention all the people who are involved in the project management and property management. So I thought if I captured the whole thing, my audience would be a lot bigger. And that was very good that we did that, because we're the highest traffic news site for real estate in the country.
Yeah.
And that's because we captured the whole thing. We don't just do residential or just commercial.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that are in any of those industries or any of those fields that you just named that read and know your magazine. Yeah. And you expanded to the West Coast and South Florida, and you're everywhere.
No, thank you. Yeah. We can do more national content, which has helped us. Our traffic is doing amazing. But we are in 7 markets that we cover core: Chicago, New York, Miami, Texas, Houston, Austin, San Francisco, Los Angeles. But if there's something really interesting that happens in Nashville, we'll cover that. Our readers are interested in it if there's a good story there. And I think one of the things that really sets us apart is that there's a tone, there's a voice to the Real Deal's content that if you just read it, you can sense it. You can tell it's from the Real Deal.
Yeah. I remember meeting you back in the mid 2000s. And I remember being like, wow, he's a really big deal. And that was really very close to when you started The Real Deal. You really pulled it off pretty quickly, and you became so well known pretty quickly too.
I remember the first time I was introduced to you was that you were in an article that we had in The Real Deal. And I was looking at the pictures of the pages and I was like, wow, she looks amazing. This Kelly Robinson. And I remember seeing that. And then I remember seeing you somewhere and recognizing you from the photo. Which
is so funny because I remember you from when I was like brand new, newbie, and you had no idea who I was. But you knew who my team leader was at the time. And, she was a big deal and she would go up to you and say hi and you'd say hi. And I'd be like, oh, wow, Amir, you're just this shining figure.
Oh, that's
yeah. And then, I don't know, it's like 10 years later, you were like, oh, that girl in the picture.
Not as shiny anymore.
No, that's not true. You just keep shining. And the thing I love so much about you and your story is that you were told no so many times, but you don't take no for an answer. But you do it in such a nice way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I remember reading this profile on Brian, I forget the producer, the guy with the spiked hair. And I remember Ron Howard was saying, it's so interesting being in these investment meetings with him because as soon as the people say, yeah, this is not for us, but thanks for the pitch, he says that's when he actually gets started. So he was like, first he tells you what the product is. And then they say, yeah, this is not for us. And he was like, that's when he closes them. It's a very competitive world to raise money for film and movies. And I love that. I always loved that. And I was like, what a great attitude about dealing with rejection. It's like, okay, well, let's get started now.
Yeah. Right. No doesn't always mean no. And you actually produced a documentary, right?
Yuval Greenblatt, he's a manager at Douglas Elliman. He reached out to me and he said, you should interview Kostas Kondylis. And I was like, we don't really cover architects in that way. And he was like, you should meet him because he's such an interesting guy and he's designed for all these people. And I decided to have lunch with them and Kostas came. And I saw this very elegant man who embodied architects. And you're like, wow, this guy is cool. I like this guy. And after the meeting, I was like, we should do a 10-minute video on him, just hanging around doing designs. And I thought it would be fun. I hired, through some list, I hired a director, the Spanish guy, Tony Comas. And I told him, I was like, this is what I want to do. And he was an artist, a tour. And he was like, okay, got it. Mission handled. And he would go on his own and he would go do these amazing B-rolls and stuff like this. And I was like, wow, Tony, this is beyond our capabilities at The Real Deal. He was like, I love this. This guy is fascinating. And Tony started following Kostas on his own time. And he had this amazing footage of Kostas in his house in the Hamptons and driving his Lamborghinis. And he's so charming. He's dressed so well. And I just wanted to watch this guy do things. And I was like, this is amazing. Tony was like, we have to make this into a 1-hour film. I was like, I don't know if we can put the money together for it and all this stuff. And he was like, we have to try. He was like, just give me $150,000 and I will put this 1 hour together. And I felt trusted in that because it wasn't something that I had to do. It was something Tony was committed to. And that's the only way to really grow. You have to find other people who really are committed to that project.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, if I'll put the money together. And I went to Andrew Heiberger, who was running Town at the time. And he was branding everything. He really built an amazing brand in a short amount of time. Andrew said, yeah, I'll give you half of it. And then once I got him, he introduced me to people from MetLife and Audi, and all these guys started to come in with the donation, with the contributions. And that was before we had an agreement from PBS. So we didn't even know we were going to sell it, but these guys came to sponsor it because we were like, give us this and I'll put a room together with every developer in the city to see the movie for the premiere. So we were like, we could sell the event, we could make the movie. So we did that.
That's amazing. So smart.
Yeah. And then Tony would be like, hey, I need an interview with Donald Trump. I was like, oh, great. Like this was when Donald Trump had second year of The Apprentice. He was a big star at that point. We were like, well, let's reach out to him. And he was like, oh, you guys want to for film? I'm in it. Let's do it. And he allowed us to follow him for 2.5 days. And he had us going to meetings and stuff and gave us great content. And it was great. Once we had Trump, then we got A.B. Rosen, and then we got boom, boom, boom. Mm-hmm. Everybody came into the film. And we had an amazing film at that point. And we rented out the Morgan Library that just had this Renzo piano theater built out. And we had everybody in the city there, and it was amazing. And the chairman of PBS happened to be there. And on that Sunday, he calls me, and he was like, meet with Ron Shapiro, who's running WNYC in New York. He was like, he'll set it up. He'll set up everything. I was like, this is the best thing that could have happened. And they signed a contract with us for 5 years to air it 5 times a year, which was a great honor.
That's amazing. It's amazing. And not only that, but you've authored a book. It just keeps going on and on. All the hats that you've worn and you wear. So tell us about your book.
Well, it's not my book. I published it.
Oh, I thought you authored it.
It's funny. People always ask for my signature on it. And I'm like, hey, guys, I just paid for the writer to write it. But Adam Piore wrote it, and he did a great job. But it was a very insider sort of new, about these new kings of New York. And that's what the book is called, The New Kings of New York. And it's about these people who popped up in the last 20 years. The Michael Sterns and the Gary Barnetts and the Seal Feldmans of the world, and where they came from, and how they came to, supersede these older families who've been here for so much longer. They came, and all these major high rises are being done by this sort of new kings. And we thought it would be a very good story. Adam Piore is a great narrative writer. And him and our editorial team together with the backstories, they put a really great book together, which was a great success for us. I love it. I want to be able to do more books. It's just that they're very hard to put together. A good one. Yeah.
No, it's hard to get a good book deal unless you want to do an ebook, which is not sexy.
No, yeah, there's something to it.
So you wear and have worn all of these different hats. You also have a cat, right?
He passed away.
No, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. No, yeah, it was one thing I realized was that it was one of the hardest things I had to deal with because I hated seeing him in such pain.
Yeah.
And the way he was behaving, it was so new and he was so disconnected that was very hard to see. Aww. And having to make that decision for your pet it's hard to do, but it was also very easy to do.
It's so hard. Yeah.
But being able to put him out of his misery was very easy to do.
Yeah, of course.
But it was very hard to experience it.
Yeah, he was your buddy for a while. Didn't you take him from somebody who needed? Yeah. You kind of rescued him, right?
Yeah. Well, he was a rescue to begin with. My mom got him, and then she keeps adopting animals from foreign countries. So then she got a dog, and the dog and the cat couldn't be together, so I ended up with him.
Okay. Yeah. You still have your plants, though.
Yes.
All of your plants. You have a green thumb. You do. Do you talk to them?
No, but they hear me talking a lot. They hear me talking.
I was just wondering because people said that works, and I've tried everything with my plants. They hate me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sun and water on a regular basis.
I've done that. Yeah. Doesn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe it's the air in my apartment.
It's funny. As soon as you give plant foods, the way they respond, it's so immediate. And it's funny because you think they move so slowly, just putting your coffee grinds in the soil. And by the afternoon, you see shoots coming out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I know that you see certain flowers perk up and wilt at certain times of the day, and sunflowers move towards the sun and all that. But I've never really gotten to that point. My orchids always die.
Those are tough.
Are they?
Yeah.
Some people say they're easy, but I'm going to go ahead and believe you.
Well, the plant itself lives for a long time, but to see the flower come back from it.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Years, yeah.
Years?
Sometimes, yeah. For the flowers to come back.
To come back.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm done with that.
Yeah. But the green leaves will be nice and hard if you lightly water them or spray them and keep it in the sun.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll try it again sometime if somebody gives me one as a gift. People always give them to me as gifts, and I love them. I think they're beautiful, but I have the hardest time keeping them alive. And I know the Northern Light. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. I've read all the instructions. I have orchid food, and it just doesn't – they don't like me. So out of all of the many hats that you wear, what's your favorite?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I really like when we – come up with new projects. It gives me the biggest rush. Mm-hmm. I always my days are divided into things that can produce content. So anybody that could give me news or in a way that I could understand news for our audience better, or things that generate revenues for us. So I really try to divide it that way. And you are in these silos. And when you break out of those two things, all of a sudden be interested in something completely different. It's a nice relief. But the thing that gets me excited is new projects. So being able to sort of step back and be like, okay, now we're going to work on a book or we're going to do a movie. It has nothing to do with what we're doing. And we just launched our salon series in our office. We had this beautiful setup built there. And the idea was to address things because the city is going through so many significant changes. Yeah. And they're coming from all sorts of angles. And it's going to be put in a place where the city that we know can change. And it's happened and it's gone through that before. But I don't want to have to wait around for this city to come back. And I don't want to have to leave the city. Right. So I want to fight to keep it nice and good. Yeah. And so the idea is to bring people in there and bring other key principles in there where we could have these open discussions about different things of what can be done or what's happening to the city. What can all these people who are key individuals in the city, what can they do to help? And we have people from the city come there, and we have people from finance and development and all sorts of different sectors. And it's great. It's great to hear other people's take on things. Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to be invited to some of your salons, and they're fabulous. It's always a good time. It's intimate, but you really learn so much, and you're a great moderator.
Thank you.
And that's part of why I wanted to interview you. So I'm like, Amir's always interviewing everybody. I want to interview Amir.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah. Thank you.
So what advice would you give to a young entrepreneur?
One thing is that whatever you want to do, no matter how big it is, you should really try to do that thing. And you shouldn't think that you have to take certain steps or that it should take you 20 years to do. If you want to be a film producer and you're like, oh, well, first I have to go become an associate film producer, or I have to go work on a set or something like that. I think you should immediately go for the film producer role. Yeah. And then if you really want to do that and you can't do that, people are going to tell you, the market's going to tell you can't do that. And then go do the next thing that you need to do to become that. And then if you can't do that, then go to the second step to the top and then keep working your way down until you can start working your way up. But the idea of, well, I want to go into film, so I'm going to go to 4 years of school and then I'm going to get a master's. And if you really want to make films, figure out what's the end product and figure out how to do it. And then if you know all the steps, what it takes to build it. I think that's one of the reasons I was able to start a magazine was because I knew how to work PageMaker and I knew journalism. I knew a little design. I knew a little about photography. And I was able to put pieces together to be able to put a magazine out. Yeah, it's true. And so many people say, start in the mailroom and work your way up and learn every aspect of the business. But that can take years. And you're right. Going to grad school, it's not necessarily right for everybody. And other people are advancing ahead of you in what you're going to school for while you're sitting there in school. And that happened to me with my acting career. I was in a conservatory program and we weren't allowed to audition while we were in school. Yeah. So I stopped my career to go to conservatory program that was very prestigious, only to just be behind when I got out. Right. Yeah. So I agree with that advice. I actually really like that. And I think it's becoming a more popular advice. You're hearing it from more people. And I'm not saying school is bad. I think school is amazing. Yeah. And you learn a lot and everything. But if the end product is to say, as for example, to be a developer, right? And then you should immediately go and see what you need to do to be a developer. Right? Yeah. And then if that means at the end of the day, you're qualified to be the guy who puts the shovel into the ground, then start from that position. Yeah. So. No, I agree with you. What's the most important lesson you've learned over the years? It's not really a lesson, but I'm very trusting and I cannot hold the grudge for the life of me. Oh. And I just forget. I just totally forget. Somebody screwed me over. 3 months later, it's totally out of my head. So it's not a lesson because I don't feel like it's changed really because I still do it. And then sometimes my partners are like, I mean, what? How do you want to still invite this guy or why would you still meet with him? But anyways, and I don't know. So it's not a lesson, but it's something that maybe it's good to have a little grudge, but I don't know.
You've always seemed so at ease to me, and maybe that's part of the reason why you're in such a cutthroat industry, but you are always so calm and at ease, and you have your charming sense of humor, and you just are always so kind to everyone. And maybe it's because you actually do forgive and forget, whereas I forgive, but I never forget.
Right.
Ever.
Like the mob.
I'll forgive partially because I want to take that burden off of myself and just forgive. But I'm like an elephant.
But that's a heavy burden to carry.
It is. It would be easier to forget. I forget other things that I should remember, where I put my keys or what day of the week it is, And
I also feel like it really dictates your mood.
Totally.
Memory is dictating your mood. I hate to give away that kind of control.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good lesson for people to take with them, I think, from this. To forgive and forget. Don't be like me. Okay. Is there anything on your mind today? Anything at all that you want to share with the audience?
Jeez, I don't know. Where would I begin? I feel like it's something that's been on my mind since actually December is this whole AI thing that has come out. And it's incredibly effective. Yeah. And I'm talking to CEOs of companies, and they still haven't even began to incorporate it into their systems and things. And it just makes me think about when the internet first happened. And it creates this amazing opportunity for young people and people who want to leap forward to use that. The fact that all these bigger companies are going to be very slow to move in that direction, where it's inevitable, it's going to come and sweep. Yeah. And the sooner you could be in it and the sooner you can be involved in it, the more of a market share you'll have and immediately create value for yourself. Yeah. And not as a company, but even as an individual. You know? So I feel like there's this great opportunity for kids. And I've been saying that to my students and at the schools I talk to. And I just feel like there's going to be this real revolutionary change in the next couple of years that creates great opportunities for young people. Yeah, I agree with that. And your future city events have become more and more future tech. And over the past just couple of years, the virtual reality that we've seen and the AI and the discussions and buying properties in the metaverse and stuff like that we've had the pleasure of hearing about at your just Future City event. Something we talked about at the recent Future City was the fact that you could do your shopping in the metaverse, not the metaverse real estate, but the fact that you could be in Arizona and have a very clear view, 360 view and understanding of a property in Paris, and you don't have to go to Paris to see it. And you could go on the street and you could see everything that's happening. You could know who's there. It's pretty incredible, I think. Yeah. And people want that. In my bigger properties, I'm doing drone footage of, even though they're in New York City. Yeah. Because why not show the neighborhood and the street from above? Well, even if it's illegal to have a drone in the city, but oops. Nobody's ever stopped my guys, but yeah. It's in New York City, they can't enforce much, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always try to be legal and ethical. Yes, of course. But I didn't know that. Okay, so we have some audience questions, some of which you already answered, but I'll give them a shout out anyway. Okay. So somebody who works at The Real Deal, Junaid Zahid. Yes. He had asked what made you start The Real Deal, which you answered. Yes. And you should know that answer anyways. He's been with me for 10 years. Yeah. Well, maybe he was trying to get you to answer it for the rest of the world. Got it. And then we had a lot of people actually interested to hear. NYC Codeine on Instagram says, would you ever sell The Real Deal? We've had a lot of offers for people to buy us. I can imagine. It's funny, the whole concept of money. Obviously, it's very nice to have a lot of money. But I didn't start The Real Deal to make a lot of money. I really started it. I always said if I made $1, I'll always flip apartments and make money and do The Real Deal. And luckily, it's become into a much larger business. But we never started it to sell it. We were not a company like that. We've been doing it for 20 years, more than 20 years now. Yeah, we're not really interested. I feel like there's so much more we could do that we're not really interested to unload it. Would you say that that it's never enough for you? You always want to do more and more. Well, I feel like there's a lot of runway still to go, and we can grow a lot more. And there's a lot more to do. And I think the Real Deal allows me a platform that gives me access into a lot of cities and places.
Yeah.
And the fact that we could go into these different cities and immediately you could call the mayor and they'll meet with you.
Yeah.
It gives you a lot of great access and introduction to these markets. And I feel like you could have all the money in the world and you don't necessarily have that access.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. This is from David Schachter, 17. He asks, who is the biggest driving force behind your pursuit into the real estate industry?
I didn't have any investors, so I self-funded.
Yes.
So luckily, I never had any partners.
Right.
Right. Of course, internally, I have partners, but never outside partners and stuff. So we never had anybody who drove us, but there was a guy, Robert, who's an amazing guy. And I remember one Saturday, I was getting sued by a very big organization. And I was very distressed because this was the first time I was being sued. And the guy was a billionaire. And he basically said, I'm going to destroy your life and take everything. He was very brutal. Bruce Wasserstein. Yeah. Oh. And he was very adamant about coming after everything. And so I was so desperate, and I was calling people and emailing people, anybody who could help. I was reaching out to them. And there was this great guy, Robert, who used to be the publisher of the Baltimore Sun. And he also owned a couple other papers. And I reached out to him. It was a Saturday. And he picked up the phone and called me right away. He was like, hey, what's going on? I'm in my office. If you want to come by, I'm eating a sandwich for the next 2 hours. You could come by and talk to me. And I went to his office and he met with me and he started giving me advice, and for no money or anything. And I had this amazing sort of a guy who just was consigliere in the media world for me.
Oh, wow.
And he was an older guy and he had an amazing career, true gentleman. And he was such an elegant guy. I always really admired him because he was just he was what you think sort of a media guy, a guy should be at his stage.
He's the avatar.
He was like the avatar.
Yeah.
He was tall, in his 70s, straight back, flat stomach, always had a nice suit on, and he was super elegant, you know, and I was I like this guy. I want to take advice from this guy. And he just liked to help me. And I was very fortunate to reach out to him. And that happened randomly. I reached out to him on a Sunday, emailing everybody. I was I'm in this situation. What should I? And he just reached out. God put him in that place.
That's amazing. Okay. This you already answered, but I'll give the shout out. It's Kaplan Eliza. How did you start The Real Deal? Did you love real estate or did you do it as a business venture? We heard from you earlier about that. And then Alexander Zakharin, thousands of agents for years. What do you think makes a successful agent?
It was funny. The first time I met Michael Schvo was in 2004. And at the time, he was on the cover of New York Magazine. And he was being written about in books. The guy was in the business for 3 years or 4 years at that point.
Yeah.
And people were writing about him. He was making covers of major publications. And I was outside Baltazar having a smoke. And I see this limousine pull up. And I see Schvo come out with a group of well-heeled folks. I was like, hey, what's going on? You're Michael Schvo. He was like, yeah. I was like, I run The Real Deal. He was like, oh, I love The Real Deal. That night I asked him, I was like, what sets you apart? Why do you think you're so successful so fast? All the agents who were big at that time were in the business for 15, 20 years. There was no new, it was the Dolly Lenses and the Sharon Baums and people like that. And this guy showed up out of nowhere. He was a taxi dispatcher. And in 4 or 5 years, he becomes the top broker at Element. And he was like, because everybody is lazy in the real estate game. He was like, nobody wants to put in the work. For Alexander, I feel like there's a 90-10 rule in real estate. We do this analysis of all the brokerages. And you see that it's only 10, 15% of the brokers in all the firms that are making any money.
Oh, yeah.
And even for some of the smaller firms, it's only a handful of brokers who represent the entire firm.
Yeah.
So you could see these brokerages with 50 people in them, but they're really feeding off of 5. And that's it. It's so easy to be in the top 10%. You don't have to be in the top 1%.
Yeah.
You just have to be in the top 10% and you make a very good living. And I can't imagine anybody who actually wakes up in the morning and puts in the time and does the minimum 40 hours not being able to make it in that top 10, 15%.
Yeah.
But if you want to do more, I feel like you can do more. There's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think especially in residential real estate, if you put the work in, but then you will make money, but you also have to understand psychology and sociology and come from an empathetic place, because people don't want wheeler dealers anymore in residential real estate, and they don't want to be sold. They want to be handheld, and they want you to understand their needs and listen.
Right.
So I think if you can do those things, which aren't that difficult to do, maybe for some people, and you can get up and put in the work, then you can be successful.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that you could enter just by putting in hard work and make decent money and make a living, it's a great thing.
Yeah. And starting your own real estate investing business, which is the best way, in my opinion, to build wealth. Okay, so now it's time for my fearless 5 questions. You get 5 questions and 2 passes. Oh, okay. So if you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer 2 of them, but you have to answer at least 3.
Okay.
Okay. Number 1.
Yes.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Recently, somebody explained to me what I am, which was very interesting to hear. And I'm a social introvert, which means I seem like an extrovert when I'm in populated setting, and people feel like I'm very engaged with everybody. But then it takes a lot out of me. And then so I like to isolate myself and remove myself out of being in crowded situations.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, if I spend the day doing a conference, then that night I need to remove myself out of social settings and sort of take a breather. And when that was explained to me, it became very clear, because I was like, that's so true. So according to science, I'm a social introvert.
Okay. What was the last thing you Googled?
Where this studio was.
Okay. If your late cat could tell us anything about you, what would he say?
I always thought if he could talk, he would be like, wow, you're amazing, Amir. Because I just feel like he must have experienced such a crazy life living with me in the city. And it was, I think he had a great life following me around and seeing the ins and outs.
You gave him a good life.
Yeah.
What's your favorite quote?
I have a few, but one of the ones that I really like is that success is failure after failure without the loss of enthusiasm. And always also liked, don't mistake motion for action. Ernest Hemingway used to say that about the writing. Just because you're in the library and you're pretending that you're writing, that's not actually action.
Right.
You're not writing. Like really write, sit down there and really start telling a story.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was interesting.
It is interesting, because we can sit there and procrastinate, but we could look like we're working for a while.
Right.
And we could be doing things that will eventually help us out, but not in the now.
Right. Being present.
Yes. Yeah. Presence is very important. And then the last one is, what is something that other people might value, or a lot of people might value, that you don't necessarily subscribe to or value?
Well, I mean, there's so many. I have different values and belief systems than everybody else. So that's endless. But I don't know. There's probably a lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
It's been truly a pleasure, as always, spending time with you, but just learning a little bit more of your story than what I already knew. It was wonderful, and I'm sure I'll want to pick your brain more. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching and listening to Kelly Minds Her Manners. Make sure to subscribe to the show, and don't forget to leave us a review to tell us what you liked about the episode. You can connect with Kelly at Kelly Minds Her Manners on Instagram and TikTok, or on our website, www.kellymindshermanners.com.